these sessions, Meet the Funder sessions, this has been part of the Games for Change Festival for a number of years now. And it's a really great opportunity, I find, to hear directly from folks who are, through a variety of mechanisms, are supporting the games and immersive media community, creation of the work, and the new companies that are doing that work. And it sort of has been spanning the spectrum from the nonprofit to, again, sort of the venture side. We've had, so today, for example, 2 of our sessions are with government agencies, National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities. And so again, so it's a real spectrum. So my name's Kevin Duggan. I'm actually Director of Development for Games for Change, which means I'm responsible for fundraising for the organization. So the funding part of the work that we do as a not-for-profit is really relevant to these conversations. So these are short sessions. They're half an hour. We'll talk. John's going to talk for a little bit, 5-10 minutes, whatever. He does not have a formal presentation for us today. So we'll do that. I'll ask a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor, as it were. And I'm going to ask folks to submit your chat via the text chat queue, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. And as always, we really ask for you to keep your questions brief and relevant to everybody as much as possible. And I will note, you can, it's probably not so important in this session since there's no presentation, you can double click on one of the screens to enlarge them. But I will stay on for this talk. And so without further ado, let me give a sort of a brief intro to John. John, is it Spinale? Is that how you say it? Okay. And you're the managing director for Jazz Ventures. I'm going to ask you one immediate quick question. Why Jazz Ventures?
So we've come up with many different Shaggy Dog origin stories, but it's actually a lot simpler than that. My name's John, and my other partners' names are Andy and Zach, and so we just abbreviated it all.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you are so you're a co-founder and general partner of Jazz Venture Partners, and you're an early stage venture capital firm focused on human performance technology. And I know this has come up actually in other sessions here, this idea of this kind of how games and technology can enhance human performance. So you've been working for over 20 years, the consumer media and entertainment technology space, and you've built and led companies whose products have touched millions of consumers, hundreds of millions of consumers around the world. So, well, with that introduction, John, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do there, and maybe give some examples of some of the investments you've made that are particularly relevant to this community. Again, games, neuroscience, immersive media, et cetera.
Sure, happy to. Well, thanks for having me here today. Always been a fan of Games for Change. My background, I'll just give a little intro and how I got here, and then what we do at Jazz, and absolutely love to have questions. So I also started my career in the games business, games for entertainment originally, and was lucky enough to be part of the early, founding team at Activision, and then after a brief stint of trying to get out of the games business and doing other technology startups, got pulled back in, which is, something that is, such a great industry. It's hard to actually get out once you get the bug. But then did a long stint at IDOS. We were the makers of Tomb Raider and Hitman and a few other big games in that era. And then most recently ran the free-to-play games business for Disney, where we were distributing, games and really around the world on mostly mobile devices in browser, and reverse the business model, which is give away the product and then via data, and iterative development, really, run your product as a live service and engage your audience in a way that they wish to monetize. And so it's really interesting to be part of the evolution of the games business from, packaged software on cartridges originally through CD-ROM all the way through to, digital distribution, games as a service. And after doing that on and off for about, call it 25 years, what I saw that's most interesting is people were taking the technology out of the games business and starting to apply it in a lot of adjacent fields that had a completely unfair advantage, whether the the rendering engines or the graphics technology was more sophisticated than that which preceded it in some of these fields, or again the business model of giving away the product and then sort of monetizing it on the back end, which is counterintuitive in a lot of areas. We saw this opportunity over and over and over again. And that actually led me to an aha moment where I, sort of shifted gears and really did actually, started a firm around this idea of games-related technologies, techniques, being applied into other sectors of the economy where they could really have, disruptive effects. And I think I saw on the list of people who are in the chat now, certainly in the conference today, is one of my partners, a guy named Adam Ghazali, who is a neuroscientist at UCSF. And actually how our fund, Jazz, and our thesis really formed is we saw people having insights into the brain, the mind, human behavior, and we're starting to be able to not only understand those impacts, but have more visibility via things called like neuroimaging and fMRI, but also the ability to actually affect change on people's mindset, behavior, or even clinical outcomes like attention deficit disorder. And once we saw again that games could have that high of an impact and that high of a value in society, that's when we said, hey, look, we really need to be able to go build a fund to be able to do this. I see Noah's on the chat here too. That's great. And so when we first began doing Jazz, we really started this fund around the idea of applied neuroscience. And a lot of the early applications were in the medical field. We saw that we can actually meaningfully diagnose and treat things like depression or anxiety or insomnia, in some cases addiction. And there was tons and tons of research that had been done around clinical environments or teaching hospitals around the world in academia. And then it was able to actually be productized and taken through, in some cases, regulatory pathways, which would be like the FDA, to be able to then have a clinically validated digital medicine that we can bring out to consumers. And so that journey for Jazz started about 5 years ago, where we sort of realized not only that these were big opportunities and big businesses, but other venture capital groups weren't really able to prosecute against them because they looked like something that lived in no man's land between sort of the traditional areas of investment. If there were in more traditional VC firms, there were biotech and healthcare people that would do drugs and devices. And, in other VC firms, there would be like consumer people that might do media or games. But what happens whenever you have a game that lives in the middle that actually diagnoses and treats something like attention deficit disorder, where does that live? And so we realized we needed a new bespoke firm to be able to actually go prosecute these interdisciplinary type investments. So Jazz, we do what we call human performance technology. How do we make people better at all facets of life? It's through the digital understanding and then influencing of, like I said, sort of human behavior across a broad variety of different facets of the economy. Some of it's in the world of regulated healthcare products. Some of it's more broadly in the world of wellness and how do we actually, in a non-regulated way, still improve your quality of life. All the way out through towards education, training, learning, hiring, and even back full circle to entertainment. And we see part of this is enabled today by, again, kind of these ubiquitous consumer technologies that are just all pervasive and are every facet of your life at this point. You have a supercomputer in your pocket, loaded up full of sensors. You have have all sorts of additional biosensing technologies around you, whether that's a smart ring like delivered by Aura or an Apple Watch that can actually track a lot of the biometric signals that you're emitting at all times. And then even your speaker has incredible quality natural language processing and an understanding basic human speech now. And so we are now completely immersed in this ubiquitous layer of technology. So the question is, how do we actually, point the arrow in the direction of doing some good and building some really great businesses along the way. And so that's what Jazz does. We invest in what we call Series A companies, which is sort of the early stage venture capital that takes it from an early prototype to through the commercialization phase. So there are people in the hierarchy of investors that invest in earlier stages, and there are firms that invest in later stages. Our sweet spot is typically what we call Series A investments, where we're helping entrepreneurs take it to the next level to actually bring their product to market to the broadest possible audience. Is that a good kind of overview, Kevin?
Totally. That was wonderful. Really, thank you so much for sharing all that. And I'm going to encourage folks to start posting your questions to the chat field. I'll just dive in with two quick questions. The first is, you did mention the do good while building good companies, or companies that can succeed. Do your investors, would they consider like a double bottom line? Would they consider maybe a lesser return for a project that is really going to yield benefits for humanity versus some other kind of investment that they can make? And so I know you're not necessarily an impact investing entity. Doesn't seem like that's baked into your into the company, but clearly there's an ethos here, right? You are trying to do good. So how do you talk to your investors about that?
That's a great question. I think historically, people that were trying to do impact investing took the view of, we're going to sacrifice returns in exchange for doing some good in the universe. Right. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, sophisticated investors, like institutional investors, or people who put large pools of money together, would rather break their world into for-profit investing in philanthropy. And if they say, hey, look, if I'm going to sacrifice returns, I would rather just, focus on somebody who can do it philanthropically, do it very well. I'll give it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they'll do a great job. And if I want to make money, then I'll put it into the for-profit world and not really worry about the impact. What we're seeing now is the ability to actually really sort of have your cake and eat it, to where in some sectors, we believe ours is one, starting with a profit motive, you can position yourself in areas that inherently have positive impact. So we never market Jazz as an impact fund, but we believe we actually do have an impact in any case. Starting with the returns, at a for-profit motive. And we think that's where you can actually have the largest impact, because you're not really sacrificing your ability to build big, meaningful companies in exchange for, positive social or environmental impact.
Great. Okay, that's good to hear. We'll jump into the chat field in 1 second. So I want to ask one other question. I hadn't really thought about this before, but you really talked about the distinction between the sort of clinical, regulatory, ruled product and the wellness product.
Right.
And when you look at those two worlds, do they hold equal promise? I mean, clearly and when you look at the companies that are working those, they must have really different capacities to deliver a product in those different ways.
It's a great question. I think it dovetails in with a few of the questions that are popping up in the chat as well. Mm-hmm. So, health and wellness are two sides of the same coin, right? The reason that they're even at all distinct is some of them are delivered through traditional medical channels, and some of them are delivered through a little more consumer or enterprise kind of business channels. But the idea is, like, how do we actually live healthy, productive lives, whether we're in a medical deficit or we can just get, a little bit better night's sleep and actually perform better in our day-to-day activities. So let me give you a few examples of things that fall into those different buckets. And to some degree, frequently, it can even just be a business model question of what's the better way to build a great company to have that positive impact on people's lives. In the case of Achille that I was mentioning earlier, where, Noah and Adam were, intimately involved with this one, we chose to go down a medical channel To answer Dove's questions, we did run enormous numbers of randomized controlled clinical trials, or RCTs, to be able to show the efficacy of this type of product. And in some cases, it was a standalone test to see, as measured, standard measures of attention, focus, short-term working memory, impulse control, all the things that are implicated in ADHD, and typically treated by prescription stimulants. And so what we needed to show is that this product, as a standalone product, had a similar, if not better, impact on a lot of those standardized measures that people use, get diagnosed in, specialist office right now. So that was a choice to go down, a clinically validated, regulated healthcare product. Congratulations to the team there. They just got the FDA approval for the world's first prescription video game. As strange as that sounds, it's something that's meaningful and moves the entire industry forward.
Yeah, and I want to quickly mention, I think Adam Ghazali's, I believe he's closing out the festival tomorrow, I think, in a session with Asi Barak, the chair of our board. And he's been a keynoter here years past.
Oh, yes, indeed. I think he's the one who introduced me to all of you guys, in fact. At the same time, we've built another product that, or one of our companies, we invested in a company called Embodied, that's building a robot for social emotional development of kids, from neurotypical to kids on the spectrum, and helping them to build and sort of evolve and develop those skills that come more naturally to some kids than others, but everybody needs practice. And in a world of COVID, what we're finding is, many of these companies are given a tailwind based on the dynamics of people not being able to go to school, or not being able to go to visit a doctor's office in person. But just like Achilles going down the prescription digital therapeutics route, Embodied said, yeah, we could actually do a prescription grade product, and have doctors deliver it, but they chose to go more direct to consumer with the robot, and they started a pre-order campaign earlier this year. And if you go to their website, the videos are absolutely stunning and moving. It's a little tabletop robot that genuinely interacts with children and really helps them along their journey, using a bunch of clinically validated protocols that have been proven in a bunch of research studies to meaningfully help kids along. But they chose as a business model to go more to the consumer route in this particular case, which limits their claims. They're not going to be able to claim to treat ASD or autism spectrum disorders. But on the flip side of things, they still are using those same protocols that have been validated to be helpful in those areas. And so I think that's an example of something that's more in the wellness category, but we think it can have a very, very meaningful impact as well.
Great. And I'm going to ask one last question before we sort of address some of the questions that come through the chat. There was one of our speakers yesterday, venture firm, and he was saying, we don't really look for the product, we look for the company. We look at the company, we look at the ability of the company, not so much for a singular product, in this case, a game. It sounds to me, for you, it really is more the product. It's really like, is this something that's going to have this potential for a really disruptive impact in the market, and then maybe the capacity or the strength of the company is something that sort of follows on from that. You want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it's one of those things. It's yes, and ultimately, when we're looking at investments, it's a multifaceted kind of matrix that you need to be able to get through. Partially is there an unmet need in the universe? Is there something that is there a problem that really needs to be fixed? Whether it's well understood and people are clamoring for that solution, or it's not really understood, but we can fundamentally identify that there's a real need, unmet need in the market. And then separately, is that the right team to go do that and build that product or business to go do it? And then third, is there a meaningful business case to sort of tie it all together such that you can get the flywheel going and ultimately, not be going down and building a philanthropic, not-for-profit effort, but something that will generate the flywheel effect of building a really strong business that can then garner additional investment and go build, bigger and stronger products and hit larger and larger audiences. And whenever you get those three things together, the market need, the right team to go execute against it, and actually a meaningfully relevant business case, that's whenever you can actually build, what we believe to be profound companies.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, so in the chat, so David asks, you mentioned training and hiring. He'd like to know more about the human performance technology, how it relates to those spaces.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think a couple of great examples of things we've done in that space, and we see lots and lots of activity. Again, taking our view of an understanding of the brain, the mind, human behavior, biology, allows you to actually perform better in a lot of the areas of enterprise, corporate hiring, learning, training, HR more broadly. I'll give you a few examples to put a fine point on it. One of our portfolio companies is called Pymetrics. It came out of, again, neuro research, understanding different facets of cognition as people were going through clinical trials for things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. And what this particular researcher really understood was, hey, I think I understand how this person thinks probably better than their own spouse does. And yet we're really only using it to track, downward progression of, people's cognitive facilities for, whether it's a disease or a drug trial. And she said, well, what if I actually applied this to other areas where really knowing somebody's abilities and innate capabilities and sort of the fundamental abilities that they have might be more, productive rather than just sort of tracking something. And she applied it to the corporate hiring process, where we all know it's fairly broken in terms of people going through, early screening, interview processes, looking at your resume, which basically only says where you've worked in the past, but not what your full potential is as a human being or an employee. And then we also know fundamentally that there's, inherent bias. We are all just, we've seen study after study to say that as human beings, we carry a lot of inherent biases. We, tend to, hire and or, be more amicable to people who look like us, sound like us, went to the same schools as us. And therefore it sort of reinforces this, implicit bias that happens in the hiring world. And so if you can actually apply a lot of these techniques in there, you can also meaningfully increase, diversity and decrease the bias that we all have, as human beings. And so that company Pymetrics has rolled out, and then the way that it's applied is actually it's all gamified. It's very interesting. It's so very relevant to this audience here today as well. You take about 20-minute, 20-minute session of a variety of different game types. There are no right or wrong answers. They just tease apart the way your brain works. Are you a little bit more a risk taker, or are you a little bit more conservative? And that matters a lot in hiring, because there are no right or wrong answers. That just means that, Harry, you in the accounting department, for instance, you probably want someone who's a little bit more conservative, ultimately, than someone who's in sales who probably is a little bit more of a risk taker, for instance. But it teases it out on 70 dimensions of cognition, and it's all scientifically validated as far as the assessments go. You apply that to the top performers in any one job function, and then the applicants who are coming into any of these potential roles run through these simulations and are essentially given like a cognitive fingerprint that says, hey, you actually match top performers in this division or that division. And it's an aid that's given to the recruiting teams there to actually help them find the best candidates for any given job. And it's very effective. It's actually been proven over multi-year longitudinal studies to both hire and retain top performing employees across a lot of different companies now.
Great, thank you. So I think you've sort of gotten to Tom's question, which is really about the types of companies, enterprises you're investing in. You've given us a couple of examples of that. Thoughts on B Corps, corporate social benefit company structures? So are you agnostic about the company form or how it's incorporated in terms of the investment?
Yeah, we are agnostic. If that's the right structure for somebody to take, then absolutely that's what you should do. I think just mechanically, if your goal is to raise venture capital, it's easier to just be a traditional, Delaware-based C Corp. It's just one fewer thing that people need to process and understand. But on the flip side of things, there's plenty of reasons one would want to be a B Corp, and I think that's a totally acceptable way to go as well.
All right, we got 2 more questions in 4 minutes. And one more just came in. Let's see. Davis asks, elaborating on Dove's question, how much market validation do you like to see in a seed stage prototype before you invest? Can you give an example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it falls into 2 different buckets, right? If we're going down a FDA regulated, clinically validated product, you need to have run small scale clinical trials to be able to, justify that there's that there's an efficacy signal. And the reason is the FDA cares. You can't, treat a named disease without FDA approval. And the FDA cares about safety and efficacy. All the things that we do here collectively as an industry are inherently safe because it's software. You're not gonna have toxicity as you do in drugs or biotech. But on the flip side, you really do need to show that the treatment or the therapy genuinely works. So so that's small scale randomized controlled trials. They can be smaller than you would for final release. They don't necessarily need to be double blinded or placebo controlled, but you need to show that that there's a there and that the product works. And if you're out in the consumer or enterprise world, then you need to show that the dogs will eat the dog food. You can build a product that there's a need for the product solves that need at some small scale. And whether that's early pilots that you're doing with early customers or or fully functioning early customers that show that all the dots connect, and now we can actually kind of build and grow an organization around that to scale it out.
So I'm going to try. We have 2 minutes, and Stuart gave us an exit question, but let's see. Bob asked. Opportunity for games to provide validated or proxy assessments of cognitive ability with their promise to provide more detailed picture of the dynamics of cognitive disorders. I don't know if that's like a 2-minute question or not. And Bob, maybe you could direct message John through the Hopin portal. John, I think you're registered. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing. So actually, that might be a little too much detail to get into this right now. But let's go to Stuart. His exit question: how do you identify the key qualities that the acquiring companies would need to snap up the startup? So, if I understand the question correctly, once you've made your investment, the company's moved down the road. What are you looking for at that point to basically get it acquired? And
yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those questions for all investors is like, ultimately, how do you you're putting money into a business. How do you ultimately cash out of that business sometime down the road? We're the type of investor who doesn't obsess about this. We sort of take the view of let's build some great businesses together, and then you will ultimately have optionality, and whether that's an initial public offering or an acquisition. And statistically speaking, there will be more acquisitions in the world than there will be IPOs. But we basically just take the fundamental premise of build a great business. One that can be self-sustaining over time, and obviously will require venture capital or startup capital to get there, but that's something that could be a standalone business, and then you'll have great options. And then what do acquiring companies look for? They look for something that's in their terminology accretive, right? It's something that's additive to what they already have, such that the $10 or $100 million that they pay to buy that business will have a larger impact on their bottom line than what they paid for it, right? And frequently they're looking for strategic adjuncts to their existing product line, or to be able to expand their customer base. So it's sort of, the answer is it depends on, you know, why you're going to be a great fit for the acquiring entity, and it's kind of a broad spectrum of reasons you might be. But we never build a company just to sell it. We build a company because we think these are companies that need to get built and products that need to hit markets, you know, and meet real needs. And then, you know, we'll kind of let the universe play out the way it will.
Great. Well, thank you. We think we have to leave it there. And John, if people want more information about Jazz Ventures or to reach out to you,
oh, please feel free.
Jay
Spinale at jazzvp.com. We can put it in the chat here as well. And Bob, yeah, Adam's work did start off around age-related cognitive decline, and I'm sure both Adam and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And it's been fascinating. That's something that we'll also be circling back around to with Achille, but we thought the ADHD was a shorter-term unmet need, big business opportunity. There's so many people who don't want to put their kids on prescription stimulants right now. And so that seemed like the most interesting starting point for the company, but they're certainly going to be doing a lot of products.
Great. John, do you want to type your contact into the?
Yeah, I'll type it in right here.
And again, thanks everyone for joining us. Our next session is 2:30 with Lakita Edwards at the National Endowment for the Arts. So that's a entirely different sort of perspective, and that's really looking more at the potential for games and learning and that incorporate the arts. And John, thanks again so much. This was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really great. I really enjoyed it.
Yep. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.